I never thought I'd hear my daughter's voice shake, but that day, it did. Mom, there's a man pointing a gun at me. Just one sentence calm in a terrifying way, and my whole world tilted. We had moved into Oakwood Estates barely 2 weeks earlier, and somehow the HOA, yes, the freaking Homeowners Association, had already escalated from parking warnings to armed intimidation. And the worst part, they had absolutely no idea who they were pointing that gun at. My name is Sarah Mitchell, 45 consumer rights attorney, recently divorced, and for the first time in decades trying to build something that felt like peace. After the divorce, I told myself I deserved somewhere quiet, safe, pretty. Oakwood Estates looked perfect. Beautiful lawns, colonial homes, neatly trimmed shrubs, smiling neighbors. The brochure practically whispered, "Fresh start." What it didn't mention was the tyrant running the HOA like a mini dictatorship, or the self-appointed security officer who liked to flash the gun he had no legal right to carry. I walked straight into a nest of petty gods people who looked normal from a distance but fell apart the moment you got close. My first red flag was the HOA secretary Karen Wilson, who handed me a binder so thick I thought she might sprain her wrist. "Welcome to Oakwood Estates," she said with this tight smile. "Please read the rulebook carefully to avoid any incidents." The way she whispered incidents should have sent me running. Inside that binder were the most absurd rules I'd ever seen. No street parking past 10 p.m., even for visitors. No gatherings without prior approval. Fines doubling each time you blinked wrong. And the cherry on top, HOA representatives could inspect your property with 24 hours notice. Completely illegal. Completely insane. I should have pushed back immediately, but I was tired. I'd just moved in. I wanted to believe it wouldn't get worse. Then my daughter Jessica arrived for a visit. 32, calm, sharp, and though nobody here knew it, a tactical operations commander with the FBI. She came home for a break, a vacation, a breath. She found a war zone. On her first morning here, our elderly neighbor Linda stopped by, leaned in close, and whispered like we were in some undercover mission. "Be careful. Our HOA president Richard Connors thinks he's still a cop. And Doug, his security guy, he's the kind who buys a fake badge online and takes it too seriously." Jessica just raised an eyebrow and sipped her coffee like someone taking notes on a puzzle she already knew she'd solve. The next morning I woke up to a bright orange violation on my windshield. Parking infraction. $50. For being 2 inches over an invisible line. I laughed at first. A short, disbelieving kind of laugh. Then I got mad. I emailed the HOA citing state property law and enforcement limitations. Within half an hour my phone rang. "Mrs. Mitchell," Richard barked. "Perhaps you don't understand how things work here. We maintain standards. We maintain order. People who can't follow simple rules don't last long." It wasn't even subtle. And oh, how badly that man miscalculated. That same evening, Jessica spotted a heavy-set man in a cheap security uniform spray painting a giant red X across my lawn. Our lawn. My home. "No more warnings," Doug said, tapping the gun on his belt. "Next time we take action." He walked away like he'd just delivered a court order instead of vandalizing someone's property. Jessica watched him go, then turned to me with this quiet smile, the kind she gets right before things get interesting. "Mom, I think I'll be staying longer than planned." The first HOA meeting felt less like a community gathering and more like attending the coronation of a tyrant. Richard stood at a podium, shoulders squared, barking orders disguised as reminders. Doug hovered behind him, arms crossed, playing the role of silent threat. Residents barely spoke. When they did, Richard cut them off. When I raised my hand and questioned the legality of their inspection policies, he smiled like a wolf. "Perhaps you should have read the covenant more carefully before purchasing your home." Ignorance isn't a defense. Heat rose in my cheeks not from embarrassment, but from the urge to absolutely level him with facts, statutes, and precedent. But I didn't get the chance. As I left Karen, the secretary slipped a note into my hand. "Cameras, microphones, they're watching everything." Doug accidentally slammed his shoulder into mine on the way out. "We know how to deal with people like you," he muttered. Ask the Johnsons why they sold so fast last year. For the first time since moving in, I felt a knot of real fear. When I got home, Jessica was sitting with Linda and another neighbor, Michael Garcia. Michael leaned forward and said, "I've been recording everything. I think I have what you need. Security footage, cash exchanges, selective enforcement, target lists. These weren't HOA bullies. This was an organized real estate harassment ring." Michael hit play and my stomach turned. Richard accepting cash from a construction crew. Doug placing violation notices on homes belonging only to residents who questioned the board. A list with addresses mine included highlighted and labeled priority acquisition. Linda, a retired journalist, laid out her notebook filled with 3 years of patterns dates, suspicious accidents. 26 families forced out, 26 dreams crushed, all replaced by shell LLCs leading back to Richard's brother-in-law. I felt sick, angry, helpless, and then somewhere deep down a fire lit. But the next few days broke me down more than I expected. After I filed a complaint with the city, my water was shut off. A maintenance issue, Doug smirked. My car was spray-painted with "comply or leave." 17 violation letters appeared in my mailbox overnight. Teenagers destroyed my garden. I could see Doug's car parked across from my house every night, a flashlight slicing through my windows like a threat. I began doubting myself. Maybe this move was a mistake. Maybe fighting them would only endanger Jessica. Maybe I should sell. Maybe running was better than risking what came next. One night I whispered, "I don't know if we can win this." Jessica looked at me, calm, steady, unshaken. "Mom, we don't run from bullies, not in this family." The next day brought the spark that would burn the whole operation down. Michael texted, "Emergency. Doug is at my door. He's armed." Jessica didn't hesitate. She moved like a soldier, not a visitor on vacation. "Call the police," she ordered, "and stay behind me." By the time I arrived at Michael's house, Doug was on the porch yelling about illegal cameras, hand hovering over his gun. Jessica stood between him and Michael, her posture relaxed, but her eyes laser sharp. She picked apart every lie Doug threw at her. He got angrier, louder, and then he snapped. He pulled his gun. He aimed it at Jessica, at my daughter. He fired a warning shot at the sky, screaming, "Take the cameras down." And in a single perfect movement, Jessica struck his wrist, twisted his arm, slammed him to the ground, and pinned him like she'd done it 1,000 times. Michael stared. I stared. Even Doug stared, face smashed into the porch, completely stunned. When the police arrived, Jessica flashed her credentials. Commander Jessica Mitchell, FBI Tactical Operations. Doug's eyes widened. I'd never seen fear flip so fast. But Richard wasn't done. The next morning, he unleashed everything. Fines, vandalism, threats, an emergency HOA meeting, planning to terminate my membership. But word had spread. 23 neighbors showed up standing with me. And Karen, sweet, nervous. Karen stood tall for the first time in years. "Everything Sarah said is true," she declared. "I have records of all financial fraud, intimidation, and evidence tampering." Richard exploded. He tried to adjourn the meeting. No one moved. Linda called for a vote of no confidence. The board was removed on the spot. Richard stormed out like a tyrant, losing his throne. Jessica whispered, "Cornered people are the most dangerous." She was right. When we got home that night, the lock on my front door was broken. Lights off. A shadow in the living room. Then his voice, "We need to talk." And this time, nobody's calling the police. Richard sat in my armchair, gun on his knee, papers in his hand. A forced sale agreement. A full retraction. "Sign it," he said, "or this becomes a tragic home invasion." Jessica stepped in front of me, her voice steady. "Breaking and entering is already a federal crime, Richard. This won't end how you think." Richard smirked. "I know exactly who you are now, Commander Mitchell. And let me tell you, even federal agents sleep." Jessica pressed something in her pocket, subtle. Recording activated. Cameras rolling. Then she did something brilliant. She talked. Not to negotiate, but to make him talk. In minutes, his ego took over. He bragged about the scheme, the properties, the payouts, the shell corporations, the connections in the police department, how he drove 26 families out, how my house would have netted him a massive profit, how Doug knew better than to talk. He confessed to everything, every crime, every lie, every threat. Then he lifted the gun toward me. Jessica's voice was calm, cold, deadly. "Before you pull that trigger, you should know that gun was reported stolen from the police evidence room 3 years ago." "Part of the reason you left the force right." Richard blinked. Confusion flickered. Jessica moved. She stepped forward, twisted his wrist, swept his legs, and slammed him to the ground hard enough to rattle the floor. A heartbeat later, he was face down, handcuffed with zip ties from her pocket. The front door burst open. FBI agents stormed in. Agent Thomas Davis stepped over Richard like he was trash. Jessica stood catching her breath. "He has a lot to say," she told the team, "and lucky for us, he said it all on camera." As Richard was dragged out of my house screaming threats that no one cared about, Jessica leaned down, looked him right in the eye and said, "Next time you point a gun at someone's mother, make sure it's not an FBI commander's." And just like that, the tyrant of Oakwood Estates was gone. Power is loud when it thinks it's untouchable, but it gets very, very small when the truth finally catches up. Sometimes the biggest bullies hide behind the smallest titles, and the only way to stop them is to stop being afraid.